Hey, it's Steve. This is an extra podcast this week. This podcast was released last month for patrons only. I'm releasing it for you just to remind you that for $5 a month, you get an extra podcast if you go to patreon.com/SundayStoic. Hello, Sunday Stoic patrons. This is the first patron-only episode for those of you donating $5 or more a month. Thank you so much for your support. You make the show possible. In this episode, we'll talk a bit about vices. Seneca is writing to Lucilius, a friend of his, talking about the town of Baiae. Baiae was a Roman town where the emperor and other high-ranking officials went to vacation and overindulge. Lots of orgies and wine drinking and showing off of wealth. Moral letters to Lucilius. Number 51 on Baiae and morals. We ought to see to it that we flee to the greatest possible distance from provocations to vice. We should toughen our minds and remove them far from the allurements of pleasure. A single winter relaxed Hannibal's fiber. His pampering in Campania took the vigor out of that hero, who had triumphed over Alpine snows. He conquered with his weapons, but was conquered by his vices. We too have a war to rage, a type of warfare in which there is allowed no rest or furlough. To be conquered in the first place are pleasures, which, as you see, have carried off even the sternest characters. If a man has once understood how great is the task which he has entered upon, he will see that there must be no dainty or effeminate conduct. What have I to do with those hot baths, or with the sweating room, where they shut in the dry steam which is to drain your strength? Perspiration should flow only after toil. What vices do you have? I have plenty. I like wine. I like beer. I like whiskey. I try not to have them to excess. I like steak. I like to overeat. Not, to great excess, but I am not in great shape. I like to sit around too long, watch TV. I have plenty of vices, plenty of room for improvement. And Seneca recommends in this reading that we run far, far away from the sources of vices. We don't even get close to them, so we can't be tempted by them. The town of Baiae was this resort town where vice was the norm, and he recommends staying far away from it as possible, because if you're there, it will be 10 times harder to resist the vice than if you shun the source of the vice. He compares our internal battle for self-improvement to an actual war, like Hannibal fighting the enemy. And I don't know much about the history of Hannibal, but he claims that he conquered by the sword, but he was defeated by his own vice, perhaps laziness and sloth, or overindulging in wine. Now, the difference between real war and the war we are engaged in is there is no rest, there is no furlough. It is a constant battle once you're aware of its existence. Something we are trying to overcome. We're trying to overcome being hedonistic and instead live life by a series of principles. And the principles that we happen to be drawing from for those of us listening to this podcast tends to be Stoicism. So he says we must not be dainty. We must buckle up and pursue this battle. We cannot retreat. And then he adds this other line that reflects to what people did in Baiae. He says we need to, we're going to sweat in this battle. We're going to work hard. Not the kind of sweat that comes from sitting around in a steam bath and relaxing in a spa, but the kind of sweat that comes only after toil, which is the only honorable kind of sweat. So how can we overcome these vices? And if you listen to the normal show, I'll probably talk a bit about this. I'm starting to take colder and colder showers every day, and I am having a very Spartan lunch every day rather than leftovers from dinner. I'm having a small portion of rice and beans, so I'm hungry by the end of the day because I didn't overindulge. And the rice and beans are cheap. And if you remember what Musonius Rufus said, that we should eat things that are easy to obtain, that don't cost us much, that are natural, that are plant-based, or maybe like milk or egg-based, things that come from animals but don't involve the slaughter of animals. So I'm not a vegetarian, but I'm trying to eat my lunches that way as a kind of a beginning of the control of the urges to overindulge a bit and to practice modesty, to practice eating simplistic meals, so that when you have a different meal, you can really reflect on how fortunate you are to be able to afford, a salad or a steak or whatever it is, keema aloo or whatever dish it is you like to have when you're eating something nice. We can't overcome these vices without deliberate action, without actually framing them in our mind, knowing who the enemy is, knowing our triggers for the enemy, and staying away from those triggers, as Seneca recommends, and then pursuing the eradication of those vices as well as we can. So I wish you luck in that, and I thank you once again for your support. Let's try to become better people, not just outwardly. Don't just, help old ladies cross the street and things like that. But when no one's watching, don't eat that extra piece of chocolate. Give a little extra money to charity or whatever it may be. Even if no one's looking, make your core better than it is now. Carpe diem.